My name is Kara Olin, and I'm a single mom living in Austin, Texas. I called my parents at 3 in the morning, begging them to watch my son while I went in for emergency surgery. They laughed and told me I was being dramatic. The pain in my lower right side was sharp hot, like someone stabbing me again and again. I was curled on the cold tile floor in my tiny kitchen in Austin, Texas, my phone pressed to my ear, sweat dripping down my temple. My 4-year-old son Leo stood barefoot in his Spider-Man pajamas, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, eyes wide, scared. "Mom, please," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I need you to come watch Leo. The doctor says it's appendicitis. They need to operate now." I heard my mother's sigh, long and heavy. "Kara, you always make everything a crisis. It's just a stomachache. Take some Pepto and sleep." I swallowed a scream as another wave of pain hit me. "It's not just a stomachache, Mom. Please, I need help." In the background, I heard my father's voice. "We're leaving for our trip in the morning, Nancy." "Hang up." Mom's voice came back sharp now. "We're going to Palm Springs, Kara. You can't just dump your problems on us every time you feel a little sick." My vision blurred with tears. I looked at Leo, trying to smile for him, but my lips trembled. "I'm not dumping my problems. I need you to watch your grandson while I get surgery. Please." A pause, then a cold laugh. "You're being dramatic. Figure it out." The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, phone still in my hand, the screen dark, the silence louder than Leo's soft sniffles as he watched me. I pressed my palm to my forehead, trying to think, trying to breathe through the pain that was ripping through me like fire. "Mommy, are you okay?" Leo's voice was small, trembling. I forced myself to look at him, to keep my voice calm even when everything inside me felt like it was breaking. "It's okay, baby. Mommy just needs to see the doctor for a little bit." Tears spilled down his cheeks as he held tighter to his dinosaur. "I don't want you to go." "I know, sweetheart." My voice cracked, but I wiped my tears quickly. "I'll be back soon, okay? I promise." I crawled to the counter, grabbed my phone again, and scrolled down to Emily's contact. She was my old coworker, now living 2 floors above me, and she had always told me to call if I ever needed help. It was 3:30 in the morning, but I called anyway. She answered on the second ring. "Kara, what's wrong? I need to go to the hospital, Emily." "It's bad. Can you watch Leo for me?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm coming down. Hold on." 10 minutes later, she was at my door, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie. She dropped to her knees in front of Leo, smiling softly. "Hey, buddy. Want to come upstairs with me for a bit?" Leo looked at me, his eyes still wet, but he nodded. I stood clutching the counter, breathing hard as Emily helped Leo gather his blanket and dinosaur. She looked at me with concern. "Do you need me to call an ambulance?" I shook my head. "No, I can drive." "Thank you, Emily." "You're not alone, Kara," she said, squeezing my arm. As they walked out, Leo turned and waved, his face pale. I forced a smile, waving back before grabbing my keys and shuffling to my car. Every step felt like knives slicing through me. At the hospital, the lights were too bright, the smell of antiseptic too sharp. The nurse at the front desk saw my face and called for a wheelchair. Within minutes, they were taking my vitals, asking me to sign forms telling me the surgeon would be ready soon. I signed papers with trembling hands, thinking of Leo upstairs, with Emily thinking of my parents packing for their vacation, while I lay here alone, terrified. As they wheeled me down the hallway, ceiling lights passing above like slow blinking stars, I tried to focus on Leo's face, on the promise I made that I would come back. I didn't know that while I was fighting to stay alive, my parents were making plans to take Leo away from me. They wheeled me into a small, cold room, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. A nurse clipped a monitor to my finger, her eyes soft as she told me to take deep breaths. My heart pounded so hard it made the machine beep faster, until she touched my arm and whispered, "You're okay, Kara. We've got you." I wanted to believe her. But the fear was louder than the beeping, louder than the pain tearing through me. I tried to think about Leo, about how his hair smelled after a bath, how he laughed when I made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. I needed to hold on to that because the fear was eating me alive. The doctor came in, young, tired eyes behind a surgical mask. "Your appendix is about to rupture, Kara. We need to take you in now. I nodded, unable to speak the words stuck behind the lump in my throat. Is there anyone you want us to call for you? The nurse asked. I almost said my parents' names out of habit, but I stopped myself. They had made it clear they wouldn't come. I shook my head. Just tell Emily I'll call when I wake up, I managed. They wheeled me through the hallway, the wheels of the gurney squeaking, the air sharp with the smell of antiseptic and metal. I stared up at the ceiling tiles, trying to count them to distract myself from the fear from the image of Leo's small face looking up at me when I left. I thought about how I promised him I would come back. I had to come back. I had to be there for his first day of kindergarten, for his first lost tooth, for every bedtime story he wanted me to read. I couldn't let him down, not like they had let me down. They moved me into the operating room, bright lights blinding the cold table beneath me, making me shiver. Nurses moved around me, checking machines, voices low but urgent. The anesthesiologist leaned over me, eyes kind. Just take deep breaths, Kara. You'll be asleep soon. I nodded, swallowing tears sliding down the sides of my face. I whispered Leo's name under my breath, like a prayer, like a promise. The last thing I remember was the mask being placed over my face, the smell of plastic, and the slow, heavy darkness pulling me under. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. My mouth was dry, my throat sore, and the lights above me were too bright. It took a moment to remember why I was there, why my body felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together. A nurse came into view, smiling gently. You're awake. Surgery went well, you're okay. I blinked, trying to focus, trying to speak. My son. Leo. Your friend Emily called to check in. Your son is safe with her. Relief flooded me so hard I started crying, silent tears that dripped into my hair as I lay there unable to move. I closed my eyes, letting the pain and exhaustion wash over me. Later, as the room darkened for the night, I stared at the ceiling, too tired to sleep, too sore to move. I thought about calling my parents, telling them I made it through, telling them I didn't need them after all. But I didn't call. I didn't want to hear their voices. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing I had survived without them. My phone buzzed on the small table beside my bed. I reached for it, slowly wincing, and saw a text from Emily. Leo is okay. He misses you. Rest. I held the phone to my chest, closing my eyes, breathing in the pain, the fear, the anger. I thought it was over, that I just needed to heal and get back to Leo. I thought that was the worst it could get. But I didn't know that while I was lying in that hospital bed fighting to recover, my parents were already making calls. They weren't calling to check if I was alive. They were calling to find out how they could take Leo away from me. While I was unconscious on the operating table, they were calling a lawyer. I didn't know any of it as I lay there breathing under the heavy drugs, fighting to wake up and see Leo again. I didn't know that my parents, Nancy and Robert, sat in their living room sipping coffee while the early Texas sun rose, dialing the number of their family attorney. She's always been unstable, I could hear my mother saying if I imagined it. We're worried for Leo's safety. They told him I was reckless, that I was too dramatic, that I made bad choices. They said I worked too much, that I left Leo alone, that I couldn't keep a stable home. They twisted every struggle I had endured alone into a weapon to use against me. The lawyer, someone they had known for years, told them what they wanted to hear. They could file an emergency guardianship petition claiming I was unfit, claiming Leo was in danger. If they moved fast, they could take him before I even left the hospital. While they drafted paperwork, my parents called my aunt in Dallas, telling her how concerned they were. They called neighbors, dropping hints about my issues, saying I was in and out of hospitals, that Leo needed a stable home, that they were just trying to do the right thing. They didn't mention that I was having surgery because my appendix had nearly burst, that I had no one else to call, that they had hung up on me when I begged for help. They wanted to look like heroes. Meanwhile, I was waking up in a hospital bed, my throat dry, pain blooming in every part of my body, thinking it was over. I thought I could just heal, go home, hold Leo, and continue the quiet, hard life I had built. But my phone buzzed on the rolling tray beside me. I reached for it, my hand trembling, the IV pulling at my skin. It was a text from Emily. Kara, call me when you can. Something weird is going on. Fear crawled up my spine as I tried to type back with numb fingers. What happened? She called instead. Her voice was low, urgent. Your parents have been talking to people. They're telling everyone you abandoned Leo, that you're unstable. I heard them mention getting custody. My heart stopped. What? No, they can't do that. They refuse to help. They said I was dramatic. I know, Emily said, her voice shaking, but they're telling people they had no choice but to step in. They're saying you're in the hospital for mental reasons, not surgery. I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to breathe, the room spinning. Emily, please. Please don't let them take him. I won't, she said firmly. Leo is safe with me. I just thought you should know what's happening. Tears slid down my temples into my hair, but I wiped them quickly, forcing myself to sit up, ignoring the pain that sliced through me. I looked out the window, the Texas sky wide and blue, mocking me with its calm. I knew exactly what this was. My parents had never wanted me to succeed, to stand on my own. Now they saw Leo as a chance to start over, to get it right after they failed with me. They didn't love Leo. They loved the control they could have over him. I hung up with Emily and sat there, breathing hard, pain pulsing in my side, fear rising like bile in my throat. They thought I was weak because I was alone, because I needed help. They were wrong. They didn't know what I would do to protect my son. I pulled the hospital blanket tighter around me, feeling the rough cotton against my skin. My IV line tugged as I moved, reminding me how fragile I still was. But inside, something was burning hotter than the pain in my side. They were trying to take Leo. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, ignoring the sharp sting that shot through me. My head felt heavy, my body weak, but I pressed the call button for the nurse. She came in, young brown hair, pulled into a tight bun, eyes kind but tired. Can I help you, Kara? I need to speak to a social worker, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's urgent. She paused, studying my face, then nodded. I'll call her for you. I sank back against the pillow, breathing hard, clutching my phone in my hand. I opened the last photo I took of Leo, him sitting on the porch with his dinosaur, smiling with jam on his face. They would not take that smile from me. A knock on the door made me jump. A woman stepped in, mid-40s, curly hair, a badge clipped to her sweater. Her eyes were calm, gentle. Hi, Kara. I'm Denise, the hospital social worker. The nurse said you needed to see me. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes, but I blinked them back. My parents are trying to take my son. They're telling people I'm unstable, that I abandoned him. I need to know what I can do. She pulled a chair closer, sitting down so we were eye level. Is your son safe right now? She asked. Yes, he's with Emily, a trusted friend. She knows what's going on. That's good, Denise said, writing something in her notebook. Do your parents have any legal documentation, any temporary custody order? No, not yet, I said, shaking my head. They refused to help me, and now they're lying about me. She nodded slowly. If they attempt to take him without a court order, that's kidnapping. You have rights, Kara. You're his mother and you're not under any restrictions. My chest loosened just a little, but fear still gripped me. What if they file something while I'm here? What if they try to lie in court? Denise's eyes were firm. Then we'll be ready. I will document your situation today, including your surgery and your current ability to care for your child. We will add this to your medical record in case your parents attempt to use your hospitalization against you. I let out a breath, tears sliding down my cheeks before I could stop them. Denise reached over, handing me a tissue. You're not alone in this, she said softly. I nodded, clutching the tissue, my hands shaking. Thank you. She stood, squeezing my shoulder. Rest as much as you can. I will check in with you tomorrow. When she left, I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My parents had always seen me as a burden, a mistake they could never fix. But Leo was different. He was light, hope, the best part of me. They wanted him because they saw him as a chance to prove to the world they were good parents. But I knew the truth. They were never going to love him the way he deserved. They would crush his spirit the way they tried to crush mine. I looked at the IV in my arm, the bruises already forming around the needle site, the pain that pulsed in my side with every breath. I would heal. I would get stronger. And I would fight them with everything I had. They thought I was weak, that I would give in, that I would be too tired and too alone to stop them. They had no idea. With the IV still in my arm, I swore they would never take Leo from me. My parents showed up at the hospital with papers in their hands. I saw them through the thin glass of my hospital room door, standing at the nurse's station with their perfect posture and fake smiles. My mother Nancy held a manila folder tight against her chest, her lips moving fast as she spoke to the nurse. My father Robert stood behind her, arms crossed, nodding with that same cold certainty I had seen all my life. My stomach twisted as I pulled the blanket higher, wishing I could disappear into the sheets. The nurse glanced at my room, her eyebrows pulling together before she turned back to my parents. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. "She's not stable," my mother's voice snapped sharp and clear through the crack in the door. "We're here to take our grandson. She abandoned him. She's in here because she can't handle her life." My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to keep from screaming. They were really doing it. They were here in my weakest moment, trying to take Leo from me. I shifted, trying to sit up, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through my side. The IV line pulled, the machine beside me beeping faster, but I didn't care. I had to hear them. The nurse said something I couldn't catch, but I saw Nancy shake her head, her hand waving in the air. "We have a temporary guardianship petition ready to file. She's unfit and Leo needs a stable home." Robert leaned in, his voice a low rumble I could barely hear. "We're trying to do the right thing here." I wanted to throw the blanket off, march out there, and scream that they were liars. That I wasn't unstable, that I hadn't abandoned Leo, that they were the ones who refused to help when I needed them most. But I couldn't move fast enough. Then I heard a new voice, calm and firm, cutting through the tension. "Do you have a court order?" It was Emily. I didn't know she was here, but hearing her voice felt like someone throwing me a lifeline. Nancy's head snapped toward her, her lips pulling tight. "This is none of your business." Emily didn't flinch. "Actually, it is. I have Leo, and unless you have a signed court order, you're not taking him anywhere." The nurse looked at Emily, then back at my parents, her expression careful. Nancy's face turned red. "We're his grandparents. We have a right." Emily folded her arms. "Not without a judge's signature, you don't." There was a tense silence. I could see Nancy's jaw working, her eyes sharp as glass, before she turned away, muttering something to Robert. The nurse nodded at Emily, then walked away, leaving my parents standing there, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. I lay back, my heart pounding, tears burning in my eyes as I stared at the ceiling. They were really trying to take him. And they were willing to lie to do it. I pressed the call button, my finger shaking as I stabbed it again and again. The nurse came in, her eyes widening when she saw my pale face, the tears sliding down my cheeks. "I need to see Denise." I whispered, my voice raw. "Please, I need the social worker now." She nodded without asking questions and hurried out of the room. I pulled the blanket tighter, holding it against the ache in my side, breathing hard to stop myself from sobbing. Outside the glass, I saw Nancy pacing, her phone to her ear, lips tight. Robert stood next to her, arms crossed, looking around like he owned the hallway. They looked like any normal grandparents, like any caring parents, like the people they pretended to be. But I knew better. I watched as my mother leaned closer to the window, her voice low, but the words clear enough through the glass. "We can't let her ruin that boy's life the way she ruined hers." My chest felt like it was caving in. I pressed my hand to my heart, feeling it pound under my palm. My mother's words echoed in my head, mixing with every memory of her calling me a failure, telling me I wasn't good enough, telling me I would never be anything. They thought they could take him because they saw me as broken. They didn't see how hard I had worked to build a life for Leo. How many nights I stayed awake to finish work after putting him to bed. How many times I skipped meals to afford his preschool, how every single thing I did was for him. The door opened and Denise stepped in, holding a folder in her hand. She closed the door quietly behind her and walked to the side of my bed. "I spoke with the nurse," she said softly, sitting down. "She told me what's happening." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, my breathing ragged. "They're trying to take him, Denise. They're telling people I'm unfit." She nodded, flipping open the folder. "I've started documenting everything, Kara. Your surgery, your stability, the fact that your friend Emily is watching Leo safely. They have no legal ground without a court order." I swallowed, forcing the words out. "What if they get one?" Denise looked me in the eyes, her voice calm but firm. "Then we will fight it. You are Leo's mother and you have rights. You are not alone in this. My shoulders shook as I let out a shaky breath, the tears finally falling. Denise handed me a tissue, waiting as I pressed it to my face. I want to make a statement, I whispered, lowering the tissue. I want it in the file that they have a history of emotional abuse, that they refused to help when I needed them most, that they are only trying to take him now because they think I can't fight back. Denise nodded. We can add that. Take your time, and when you're ready, we'll document everything. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to sit up straighter, ignoring the pain that shot through my side. I looked at Denise, my voice steady. I'm ready now. She opened her notebook, clicked her pen, and waited. I started to speak, telling her about the night I called my parents, how they hung up on me, how they called me dramatic while I was on the floor in pain. I told her how Emily had stepped in, how Leo was safe, how I was recovering because I needed to be there for him. I told her everything. Denise wrote it all down, never interrupting, her eyes kind, her presence steady. When I finished, she closed the notebook and stood. You're doing the right thing, Kara. Rest now. We'll handle this. She left, and I lay back, breathing hard, clutching the thin hospital blanket with white-knuckled hands. Outside, I saw my parents arguing with the nurse, their voices rising. I could see the frustration on Nancy's face, the anger in Robert's eyes as they realized they weren't getting what they wanted. They thought I would give up. They thought I would be too weak to fight. They didn't know that I was ready to fight them, even with the IV still in my arm. I had to leave the hospital earlier than I should just to appear in court. They wheeled me out with a fresh bandage on my abdomen, the pain sharp with every breath, but I signed the discharge papers with shaking hands. I couldn't rest. I couldn't wait. They were trying to take Leo, and I would not let that happen. Emily was waiting outside in her old Ford, the back seat already set up with a booster seat and Leo's dinosaur blanket. She looked at me with worried eyes as I climbed in, clutching my medical file to my chest. Are you sure you're okay to do this? She asked. I don't have a choice, I said, adjusting the seatbelt as pain shot through my side. We drove in silence, the Texas sun glaring through the windshield, the world moving too fast outside as my heart pounded. I pressed my hand to the bandage, breathing through the pain, focusing on Leo's face in my mind. When we arrived at the family court building in downtown Austin, I saw them there. Nancy and Robert stood by the entrance, dressed in clean, pressed clothes, holding their papers like trophies. My mother's eyes flickered when she saw me step out of the car, pale and slow but standing. I saw Judith, the young attorney Denise had connected me with, waiting by the doors. She was in her early 30s, blonde hair in a tight bun, a gray suit that made her look sharp and confident. She walked up to me, her voice steady. You're here. Good, we're going to handle this. I nodded, swallowing, gripping the medical file tighter. They're saying I'm unstable. Judith's eyes narrowed. They don't have evidence, Kara. We have your hospital records. We have Emily's statement. And you're here showing up for your son. I nodded again, feeling tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them away. We walked into the building, the cold air inside making me shiver. We passed through security, the metal detector beeping when it caught the small metal clip in my surgical bandage, but the guard waved me through with a soft look of pity. The courtroom was small, the wood benches worn, the air tense. I sat down at the table beside Judith, my parents across the aisle, with their lawyer, a man in a dark blue suit who looked bored as he flipped through their papers. Nancy kept looking at me, her lips pressed tight, her eyes filled with false concern. Robert didn't look at me at all. I clutched the edge of the table, breathing slow, my stitches pulling with every small movement. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge, a tall black woman with sharp eyes, entered and took her seat. Today's case is regarding the emergency guardianship petition filed by Nancy and Robert Harper, seeking temporary custody of Leo Harper, age 4. The words felt like knives, but I forced myself to sit up straighter. Nancy's lawyer stood, launching into a speech about how I had been hospitalized multiple times, how I was unstable, how Leo needed stability and a safe environment. Nancy sniffled loudly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking as if she were the victim. I felt Judith's hand squeeze mine under the table. The judge listened, taking notes, her face unreadable. When the lawyer finished, the judge looked at me, then at Judith. Miss Carter, do you have a response? Judith stood, her voice clear and strong. Your Honor, my client was hospitalized for an emergency appendectomy, a medical emergency unrelated to any mental health concerns. We have her medical records here. We have testimony from her friend and caregiver, Miss Emily Ross, confirming that Leo has been safe and well cared for during Miss Harper's recovery. She handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. The judge flipped through them, nodding slowly. Judith continued. We also request that Leo's voice be heard through his social worker, who has met with him during this period. The judge glanced at my parents, who looked caught off guard, their lawyer shifting uncomfortably. The judge looked back at me, her eyes sharp. Kara Harper, she said, her voice calm but heavy. Do you have anything you wish to say before I hear from the social worker? I took a deep breath, feeling my stitches pull, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it filled the room. I looked at Leo's dinosaur blanket in my bag, at the empty space beside me where he should have been. And I knew this was the moment that could change everything. I stood slowly, every muscle in my body screaming, my stitches pulling tight as I took a deep breath. The courtroom felt cold, the air heavy, the eyes of my parents and the judge locked on me. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice shaking for a moment before I steadied it. I have something to say. I looked at Nancy, who was clutching her tissue, eyes red as if she had been crying, but her lips were tight, waiting for me to fail. I looked at Robert, who finally met my eyes, his face blank, hiding the control he wanted so badly. I turned back to the judge, lifting my chin. Your Honor, I didn't abandon my son. I called my parents when I was in pain, begging them for help because I had to go into emergency surgery. They refused. They told me I was dramatic and they hung up on me. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. I have been Leo's only parent since the day he was born. I work hard to provide for him, to give him a safe, happy home. I have never been hospitalized for mental health issues. I was in the hospital because my appendix nearly ruptured, and I needed emergency surgery so I could stay alive to continue caring for my son. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. They didn't want to help me when I needed them most, but now they're here trying to take him because they think I can't fight back. I took another breath, steadying my hands against the table. Your Honor, Leo is my world. Everything I do is for him. I may not be perfect, but I love him and I take care of him. I am here even when I should still be in a hospital bed because I will fight for him. I glanced at Judith, who nodded at me, pride in her eyes. I turned back to the judge, holding her gaze. Please don't let them take him away from me. Silence filled the courtroom, heavy and sharp. I heard Nancy's sniffle louder than necessary, as if to remind everyone she was there. The judge nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the papers in front of her. She looked at the social worker, a middle-aged woman with dark curly hair, who stood and approached the front. I met with Leo this morning, the social worker said, her voice calm. He is safe with Miss Emily Ross, who has provided temporary care during Miss Harper's recovery. Leo expressed that he misses his mother and wants to go home with her. Nancy let out a sob, shaking her head. He's 4. He doesn't know what's best for him. The judge held up her hand, silencing Nancy without a word. The social worker continued. In my professional opinion, there is no evidence that Miss Harper is unfit or unstable. She has shown dedication to her son, and her hospitalization was due to a medical emergency. Leo has been well cared for, and there is no indication of neglect. I closed my eyes for a moment, relief flooding through me, but fear still pressed against my ribs. The judge nodded, looking at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Harper, do you have any additional evidence to support your petition? Nancy stood, her hands shaking, her face red. She has always been unstable. She's selfish, she can't keep a job, she doesn't let us see Leo. Robert placed a hand on her arm, trying to calm her, but she pulled away. We're just trying to save that boy from a ruined life. The judge's eyes were cold as she looked at them. Do you have documentation, evidence, any reports indicating instability or neglect? Nancy opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at me, her eyes full of anger, then back at the judge. Number. The judge nodded, once setting down her pen. I will take a short recess before I make my ruling. She stood, and the bailiff announced the recess, the sound of benches shifting as people stood, filling the air. I lowered myself back into my seat, my hands trembling, pain radiating through my abdomen. Judith leaned over, her voice low. You did everything right, Kara. I looked at my parents, who were huddled together, whispering, their faces dark with frustration. They didn't know that no matter what happened next, I would never stop fighting for Leo. I told the court the truth they had tried to bury for years. I stood again, my legs trembling, the pain in my side sharp with every breath. The courtroom felt too quiet, the air thick as everyone waited for me to speak. My parents have always wanted control, I said, my voice low but steady. They never wanted me. They only wanted the version of me that did what they said. Nancy's face turned pale, her lips pressing into a thin line. When I was 14, they pulled me out of school to take care of my grandfather while they went on trips. They told me it was my duty, that I owed it to the family. I missed a year of school because of them. The judge's eyebrows lifted, but she didn't interrupt. When I got pregnant with Leo, they told me I was ruining my life, that I was an embarrassment. They didn't come to the hospital when I gave birth. They didn't offer help. They told me I had made my bed and now I had to lie in it. Robert shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, but I kept going. They only came back into my life when they realized people saw them as grandparents. They liked how it looked on Facebook, how it made them seem caring. But they never cared about Leo. They care about control, about looking good to other people. Nancy shook her head, tears in her eyes, but they weren't real. Kara, stop, she whispered, but I ignored her. My little brother Evan, he was their golden child. They spoiled him, gave him everything. When he died in that car accident, they blamed me for not being there to pick him up, even though I was working a double shift trying to pay rent. The courtroom was silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I swallowed hard, feeling the burn in my throat. They're trying to take Leo because they think I'm weak, because they think they can finally control something again. But I'm not that scared girl anymore. I won't let them hurt him the way they hurt me. Judith placed a hand on my arm, grounding me, reminding me I wasn't alone. The judge nodded slowly, turning to the social worker. Do you have anything to add? The social worker stood, her file in hand. Your Honor, we have visited Miss Harper's home multiple times. Leo is always well cared for, clean, fed, and happy. We have no reports of neglect or instability. We see no reason to remove Leo from his mother's custody. Nancy let out a choked sob, covering her face with her hands. Robert rubbed her back, but his eyes were hard as he stared at me. The judge looked at them, her voice calm but final. At this time, the court sees no evidence to support the petition for emergency guardianship. The request is temporarily denied. Leo will remain in the custody of his mother while we await further hearings. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I had been holding my knees, weak tears filling my eyes as I sat back down. Nancy's head snapped up, her eyes, red anger flashing across her face. Robert stood, helping her to her feet, whispering something in her ear. They turned and walked out of the courtroom, their backs stiff, their shoulders tight. But as they left, Nancy turned to look at me, her eyes burning with a promise I knew too well. This wasn't over. I watched them walk out of the courtroom, their heads high but their steps stiff with anger. Judith packed up our papers, sliding them back into her leather folder, her movements calm, controlled. She looked at me, her eyes softening. You did well today, Kara, she said. I nodded, swallowing, trying to process the storm that had just passed, even if it wasn't over. My hands were shaking as I gathered Leo's dinosaur blanket from my bag, pressing it to my chest for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of him. Can I go get him now? I asked, my voice quiet. Judith nodded. Yes. The judge's ruling is clear. Leo stays with you. Relief washed over me so hard it made me dizzy. Emily had promised to keep Leo safe while I was in court, taking him to the park near her apartment in Austin, letting him run under the warm Texas sun while I fought for him in that cold courtroom. Judith walked with me out of the courthouse, the bright sunlight blinding after the dark wood and fluorescent lights inside. The air smelled like warm pavement and city dust, but I didn't care. I felt like I could finally take a breath. You're not alone in this, Kara, Judith said as we reached the parking lot. If they try again, we'll be ready. I nodded, gripping the dinosaur blanket tighter. Thank you, Judith. For everything. She gave me a small smile before heading to her car. I stood there for a moment, letting the heat sink into my skin, letting the tension slide off my shoulders piece by piece. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing Emily's name on the screen. Hey, I answered, my voice shaking. Are you okay? She asked. I could hear Leo's laughter in the background, the wind rushing through the speaker as he ran. "It's over for now," I said. The judge denied their petition. Emily let out a breath. "Thank God. Leo's been asking when he can see you." A tear slipped down my cheek as I closed my eyes. "Tell him I'm coming to get him." I hung up, sliding my phone back into my pocket, and climbed into Emily's old Ford, the seats warm from the sun, the car smelling like coffee and crayons. The drive to Emily's apartment felt longer than it should, every red light a reminder of the fear that still pressed against my ribs. I kept seeing Nancy's eyes in the courtroom, the cold promise in them, the way she looked at me like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I pulled into the small lot behind Emily's building, climbing out slowly, my stitches pulling the soreness, a reminder of everything I had survived. Leo saw me from the grass, dropping his dinosaur and running toward me with his small arms open, his face bright. "Mommy," I bent, ignoring the pain, letting him crash into me, wrapping my arms around him, breathing in the scent of sunscreen and peanut butter, the warmth of him grounding me. "I missed you so much, baby," I whispered into his hair. He pulled back, looking at me with those big brown eyes that were so much like mine. "Can we go home now, Mommy?" I nodded, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Yeah, baby. We're going home." Emily walked over, her smile, tired but warm. "You okay?" "I will be," I said, standing, holding Leo's hand tightly. "Thank you, Emily, for everything." "Any time," she said, touching my arm. "You're not alone." I looked down at Leo, his small hand gripping mine, his dinosaur tucked under his other arm. As we walked to the car, I felt Nancy's eyes in my mind, the look she gave me before she turned away, the silent promise that this wasn't over. And I knew she was right. The fight wasn't over. They started a smear campaign against me on social media. It began with a post on Facebook, Nancy's profile picture showing her holding Leo when he was a baby, smiling like she was the perfect grandmother. The post was long, written in her careful, guilt-laced tone. She called me unstable. She said I was a danger to Leo. She begged the community to help save her innocent grandson from a toxic environment. It spread fast, shared by relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, by neighbors who barely knew my name but liked to gossip. I found out when Emily called, her voice tight with anger. "Kara, have you seen what your mother posted?" My stomach dropped. I opened Facebook, scrolling past a photo of Leo with his messy curls and soft smile attached to Nancy's post like a weapon. The comments were filled with pity, with offers of help, with people saying, "Praying for you and Leo," as if I was already gone. My hands shook as I set the phone down, breathing hard. I looked over at Leo sitting on the floor with his dinosaur, humming to himself, safe and unaware that his face was being passed around like a lost pet poster. I wanted to scream. It didn't stop there. They posted on Nextdoor, warning neighbors to watch out for me, claiming I was violent, unstable, dangerous. A few neighbors I used to chat with at the mailbox stopped looking me in the eye crossing the street when I walked past with Leo. But not everyone turned on me. Emily posted a long message on her own page, calling out the lies, telling the truth about how she was there, how she saw me fighting for Leo, how I had always cared for him, worked for him, loved him. A few of my coworkers at the health tech startup I worked for shared Emily's post, adding their stories of how I balanced motherhood and work, how I stayed late to finish projects, how I always talked about Leo with pride. It helped, but the damage was there. Every time I opened my phone, I saw Nancy's post shared again, her words twisting inside me like a knife. In the middle of all of it, I was getting ready to pitch to investors. Our startup was preparing for a new round of funding, and I was one of the speakers. It was my chance to secure a future for me and Leo, to step forward into the life I was building for us. But every time I tried to focus, the notifications popped up, messages from people I didn't know, calling me unfit, calling me a monster, telling me Leo deserved better. I blocked them, but they kept coming. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, pitch slides half finished, while Leo colored beside me, his small hand moving carefully over the page. He looked up at me, his brown eyes wide, innocent. "Mommy, why does Grandma hate you?" The crayon slipped from his hand, rolling across the table and falling to the floor. My heart cracked, the tears coming before I could stop them. I pressed a hand over my mouth, trying to breathe, trying not to let him see me break. I wiped my face, quickly leaning forward to pull him into my lap, ignoring the soreness in my side. Grandma and Grandpa are confused, baby, I whispered, kissing the top of his head. But I love you and I will always keep you safe. He nodded, resting his head against my chest, his small hand gripping the fabric of my shirt. I held him tighter, rocking him gently as the notifications kept lighting up my phone beside us, each one another reminder that they weren't done trying to break me. After I put Leo to bed, I sat alone on the couch, my laptop open, the glow lighting up the dark living room. His small dinosaur pajamas were still on the floor where he had changed, his soft breathing coming from his bedroom down the hall. I tried to focus on the pitch deck, the numbers, the vision I wanted to share with investors, but the words blurred. Every notification buzzed on my phone, making me flinch. I turned it over face down, trying to block it out. But I could still feel it. The judgment. The whispers. The weight of every person who believed Nancy's lies. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temples, trying to breathe. My mind went to Leo's question, the fear in his voice when he asked if his grandparents hated him. It wasn't fair. He was just a child and he deserved peace. I opened my eyes and clicked to the next slide on the pitch deck, reading the words I had written about growth, about vision, about stability, about building a future. That was why I was fighting. For him. For me. For the life they tried to take from me. I adjusted the blanket over my legs, breathing in deeply, letting the air settle the storm inside me. I was not going to let them distract me from what mattered. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight as I worked, refining my slides, practicing my words out loud, pacing the small living room while I rehearsed. I imagined Leo in the audience cheering for me, his small hands clapping, his smile wide. That was the future I was building, one pitch at a time. When I finally closed the laptop, exhaustion pressing heavy on my shoulders, I felt a small sense of peace. I was doing everything I could. I got up and checked on Leo, brushing his curls back from his forehead, kissing him softly. He stirred, rolling over, clutching his dinosaur tighter. I walked back to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. That was when my phone rang. I froze, the screen lighting up from where I had left it face down. No caller ID. My stomach tightened, a cold sweat breaking out across the back of my neck. I picked it up, pressing it to my ear, my voice low. Hello. There was a pause, the sound of breathing on the other end. Kara. My blood ran cold. It was a man's voice, deep, calm, but there was something in it that made my skin crawl. You need to stop. I swallowed, gripping the counter with my free hand. Who is this? You know who I am, the voice said, almost bored. And you know what you're doing is wrong. Think about your son. Think about what's best for him. I shook my head, my heart pounding. Don't call me again. The man chuckled low and slow. You think you're protecting him, but you're making it worse. Walk away, Kara. Before it's too late. I ended the call, slamming the phone down on the counter, my hands shaking so hard I had to press them against the cold surface to steady them. The house was silent, but the words echoed in my head. Before it's too late. I stood there in the dark kitchen, the glass of water shaking in my hand, the call replaying in my head on a loop. Before it's too late. I set the glass down carefully, the clink loud in the silence, and picked up my phone again, staring at the screen, hoping the number would show up. Something, anything I could track. Nothing. My mind raced with questions, fear crawling up my spine, wrapping around my throat. Who was it? Was it Robert? Someone they hired? A neighbor who believed their lies? I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, trying to push the fear back, trying to think. They wanted me scared. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me to give up. I straightened, taking a deep breath, and walked to the front door, checking the locks, turning them to double-check, pulling on the handle to be sure it was secure. I moved to the windows, making sure the blinds were closed, peeking through the slats at the dark street outside. No one. But the fear stayed. I grabbed my phone again, dialing Emily, pacing the living room as the call rang. She picked up on the third ring, her voice groggy, worried. Kara. What's wrong? They called me. I whispered, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake Leo. Some man. He told me to stop. To think about Leo. To walk away. Jesus, Emily breathed, her voice sharp now. Did he say who he was? Number, but it felt like a threat. My voice cracked, the fear breaking through. I don't know what to do. There was a pause, Emily's breathing on the line, then her voice firm. You're going to document this. You're going to call Judith in the morning. And you're going to keep going. I sank onto the couch, tears slipping down my cheeks. What if they come here, Emily? What if they try to take him? They won't. She said, her voice steady, grounding me. You have the law on your side. You have people on your side. You're not alone. I let out a shaky breath, wiping my face. I'm so tired, I know, she said softly. But you're stronger than them, Kara. You always have been. I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in, letting them hold me up when my own strength felt thin. Thank you, I whispered. Get some rest, she said. You need it for tomorrow. We'll figure this out. We hung up and I sat there for a moment, staring at the dark window, watching the reflection of myself, small and tired but still here, still fighting. I checked on Leo again, brushing his hair back, listening to the soft sound of his breathing, the small snore he made when he was deep asleep. His room smelled like baby shampoo and crayons, the dinosaur blanket tucked under his chin. I promise, baby, I whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. I'm not going to let them win. I turned on the hallway light, leaving it on as I went back to the living room, the soft glow a small comfort in the dark house. I opened my laptop again, forcing myself to pull up the pitch deck to keep going, to focus on the future I was building for us. Every slide I read, every note I made was a promise. I would not give up. Even when the fear crept in, even when the phone call replayed in my mind, I kept going. Because they wanted me to break. And I wouldn't. Hours passed as I worked rewriting sections, practicing my words in a whisper, so I wouldn't wake Leo, pacing the living room, letting the motion burn off the fear. When I finally closed the laptop, the clock on the wall read 3:12 a.m. I stood in the quiet house, stretching, my body sore, my mind exhausted, but my resolve stronger than it had ever been. I looked out the window one last time, the street empty under the glow of the streetlights, the world silent. They thought a call in the night would scare me into silence. They didn't know me at all. I turned off the light, heading to my bedroom, ready to close my eyes for a few hours before the sun rose, before Leo woke up and asked for pancakes with chocolate chips. As I lay down, pulling the blanket over me, the fear still there but smaller now, I repeated it in my mind over and over until I drifted into sleep. I will not let them win. I was afraid they would destroy my life, but I didn't know karma was faster. It started with a phone call from Emily on a Wednesday morning while I was packing Leo's lunch for preschool. The kitchen smelled like peanut butter and the soft light of Texas sunrise spilled across the counters. You need to see this, Emily said, her voice tight, but there was something in it that almost sounded like hope. She sent me a link. I clicked it, my hands trembling, Leo humming to himself as he lined up his dinosaur figures on the table. It was a local news article from Austin Today, headline bold across the screen. Local couple accused of financial exploitation and emotional abuse. I blinked, reading the names Nancy and Robert Harper. My parents. The article detailed how they had once taken guardianship of my younger brother Evan when he was a teenager, claiming it was to help him focus after he struggled in school. It described how they had controlled his bank accounts, restricted his movements, and isolated him from friends until the day he died in that car accident. I was blamed for not preventing. There were statements from old neighbors, whispers that Nancy and Robert had once helped manage finances for an elderly neighbor who passed away, and that thousands of dollars had gone missing, though no charges were ever filed. The article ended with sources say the couple recently attempted to file for emergency guardianship of their grandson, raising concerns among community members. I sank into a chair, the phone still in my hand, the world spinning for a moment. Karma, I whispered. Leo looked up, tilting his head. What's karma, Mommy? I forced a smile, reaching for his hand. It's when the truth catches up to people, baby. The article spread fast. Neighbors who had avoided me now avoided Nancy and Robert. Their Facebook posts were flooded with comments calling them manipulators, calling them out for trying to take Leo. Friends they used to brunch with stopped calling. The church they bragged about serving at quietly distanced themselves. Meanwhile, at the startup, I walked into the office with my laptop bag and a coffee, ready to focus, to build, to pitch. Jason, our CTO, smiled at me from across the table during our prep session. Ignore the noise, Kara. Investors believe in you. We believe in you." His words meant more than I could say. While Nancy and Robert lost their grip on the community, I found mine tightening on the future I was building. I focused on Leo's giggles as he played with Emily's dog in the evenings while I worked. I focused on the pitch deck, on the growing team, on the product I believed in, on the safe, quiet life I was building for us. But I knew them. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. They came to my house 3 days later. It was a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen making pancakes for Leo, the smell of vanilla and butter filling the small apartment, the cartoons playing softly in the background. There was a knock on the door. Firm. Familiar. My stomach dropped. I wiped my hands on a towel, taking a deep breath before walking to the door. I looked through the peephole, my heart pounding. Nancy and Robert stood on the porch dressed in their clean church clothes. Nancy's makeup perfect, Robert holding his hat in his hands, twisting it slowly. I opened the door just to crack the chain still on. "What do you want?" Nancy's eyes were red, tears already slipping down her cheeks. "Kara, please. We just want to see Leo." Robert cleared his throat. "We just want to talk, Kara. We've been your parents your whole life. Let us see our grandson." I felt Leo press against my leg from behind, his small hands clutching my sweatpants, his eyes wide as he peeked around me. "Is Grandma mad at us?" he whispered. Nancy's face crumpled as she saw him. "Oh, Leo baby, Grandma isn't mad. Grandma loves you so much." I stepped back, blocking Leo from view. "Number. You don't get to do this. You don't get to cry now and pretend you didn't try to ruin our lives." Nancy sobbed, reaching for the door, but the chain held it. "Kara, people are turning against us. We just want to fix this." "You want to fix your image," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You don't care about him. You care about control." Robert's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Nancy wiped her tears, looking at me with pleading eyes. "Please, Kara, let us take him to the park. Just for an hour." Leo's grip on my leg tightened. "I don't want to go," he whispered. And that was all I needed. I looked my mother in the eyes, letting her see the finality there. "Number, we're done." I closed the door, sliding the lock into place, my hands shaking as I pressed my back against the wood. Nancy's sobs came through the door, muffled but sharp like a wound reopening. I heard Robert trying to calm her, telling her to leave, his voice low, frustrated. I sank to the floor, pulling Leo into my arms, breathing in the scent of his hair, letting the quiet of the house wrap around us. "Mommy," Leo whispered, looking up at me, "it's okay. I don't need them." I kissed his forehead, holding him tighter. "I know, baby. I know." We stayed there for a long moment, listening as their footsteps finally faded, the front gate clicking shut behind them. Leo pulled back, his eyes soft but strong, so much stronger than I had ever been at his age. "Are we okay now, Mommy?" I nodded, brushing his curls back, tears slipping down my cheeks, but I was smiling. "Yeah, baby, we're okay." That night, as I tucked him into bed, the moonlight spilling across his small face, he looked at me, trust shining in his eyes. "I love you, Mommy," he said, his voice sleepy. "I love you more than anything," I whispered. I stood at his door for a long time after he fell asleep, watching the rise and fall of his breathing, the peace on his face, the safety in this small room. They had tried to take everything from me. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. They thought they ended my life, but really it was just the beginning. The day of the pitch, I stood in the glass conference room, the Austin skyline shining behind me, my palms sweating as I gripped the remote for the slides. Leo's dinosaur keychain hung from my bag, a reminder of why I was here, why I couldn't fail. I looked out at the investors, their sharp eyes, their notepads ready, waiting. And I spoke. I spoke about our product, about how it would change lives, about how we were building something real, something that mattered. I spoke about our growth, our numbers, our plan. But most of all, I spoke with the strength I had earned, the strength I had bled for, the strength I had found in the middle of fear. When I finished, there was silence for a moment, and then questions, fast and sharp, but I answered every single one. And then they clapped. After Jason found me in the hallway, his grin wide, his eyes bright. "You did it, Kara." I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I was holding the tears stinging my eyes. We did it. 2 weeks later, we secured funding. The emails came and the paperwork was signed, and the team celebrated with cheap champagne in the break room, Leo sitting on the counter eating a cupcake frosting on his nose. I was offered the role of COO. I said yes. That weekend, I filed the papers to change Leo's last name, taking on mine, letting go of the last tie to the people who tried to steal him. When the judge stamped the papers, I felt something break free inside me, something I didn't know I was still holding. Freedom. I walked out of the courthouse with Leo's new birth certificate in my hand, his small hand wrapped tightly in mine. The paper was warm from where I had clutched it to my chest, the ink still fresh, his new last name printed clearly. Olin. My last name. Leo skipped beside me, his dinosaur backpack bouncing. Mommy, does this mean we match now? I looked down at him, tears pricking my eyes, and nodded. Yeah, baby. We match now. He grinned, showing the small gap where he had lost his first tooth, and I felt something inside me settle, a peace I hadn't known in years. That evening, I sat on the living room floor, papers and colored pencils scattered around as Leo drew a picture of us standing under a rainbow holding hands, his dinosaur beside us. The apartment smelled like tomato soup and grilled cheese, the simple dinner we had made together. Leo looked up, his eyes bright. Mommy, can we put this on the fridge? I took the drawing from him, my hands shaking a little as I traced the stick figures he had drawn, the hearts floating around them. Of course we can, I said, standing to pin it on the fridge with the ladybug magnet he loved. Leo cheered, throwing his arms around my waist, squeezing me tight. I love you, Mommy. I bent down, hugging him back, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and the warmth of him. I love you more than anything in this world. That night, after I tucked him in, I stood by the window looking out at the lights of Austin, the city alive and moving, the hum of cars below like a lullaby. My phone buzzed with a message from Jason. Congrats again, Kara. Investors are excited and so are we. Rest tonight. I smiled, setting the phone down, letting the words sink in. I was building a future not just for me, but for Leo, for the life we deserved. The next morning, I walked into the office, the badge around my neck now reading COO. The team clapped as I walked in, Emily bringing me a coffee with Boss Lady written in Sharpie across the lid. You've earned this, she said, hugging me. I laughed, feeling the weight lift a little more, feeling the truth of it settle in. Later that week, I sat down at my laptop, opening a new document, typing the words Leo's Shield at the top. It would be a small community fund helping single mothers who were fighting family abuse, giving them the resources I had once begged for. I didn't need revenge anymore. Living free, living strong, living a life they could never control, that was the best revenge. Leo crawled into my lap as I typed, his small hands pressing against the keyboard. What are you doing, Mommy? He asked, looking up at me with those big brown eyes. I'm making something to help other mommies, I said, kissing the top of his head. So they can be safe just like us. He smiled, leaning his head against my chest. I love you the most, Mommy. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close, letting the moment sink into my bones. I love you the most too, baby, I whispered. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The next few weeks were a quiet kind of busy. I spent mornings dropping Leo off at preschool, his dinosaur backpack bouncing as he waved goodbye, his small voice calling, "Bye, Mommy, love you." I would drive to the office with my coffee, the Texas sun warming my face through the window, a quiet peace settling in my chest as I parked and walked in with my laptop bag over my shoulder. Meetings, investor calls, product reviews, team check-ins. I was in it, alive, present, building something that mattered. At lunch, I would sit with Emily, sharing stories about Leo's latest dinosaur obsession, the little songs he sang, the way he asked for extra marshmallows in his cocoa. Every evening, I would pick him up, his arms wrapping around my legs as he ran to me, shouting "Mommy" like it was the best word in the world. We would walk to the car, holding hands, talking about his day, the pictures he drew, the new friend he made named Noah, who also liked dinosaurs. At home, we would cook dinner together, Leo standing on his step stool helping me stir the pasta, giggling when sauce splashed on the counter. We would eat, watch a cartoon, read a book, and then I would tuck him in, his dinosaur tucked under his arm, his eyes closing as I stroked his hair. Every night before bed, I would stand by the window looking out at the city lights, breathing in the quiet, letting the peace of this small, safe life wrap around me. One Friday evening after Leo fell asleep, I sat at my laptop working on the launch page for Leo's Shield. It would be small at first, but it would be real. A place for mothers who were fighting, who needed help with legal fees, housing, counseling, who needed to know they weren't alone. I paused, reading the mission statement I had written. To protect mothers and children from family abuse, to build futures no one can steal. I pressed save, leaning back in my chair, letting the tears come quiet and warm, but these weren't tears of fear anymore. These were tears of freedom. A few days later, Leo and I sat by the window on a rainy evening, the sky dark, the sound of rain tapping softly against the glass. We had mugs of warm cocoa, the marshmallows melting into the chocolate, the apartment smelling like vanilla and cinnamon. Leo rested his head on my shoulder, looking out at the rain. "Mommy, I love you the most," he whispered. I kissed the top of his head, my arm around him, feeling the warmth of him, the life we had built, the peace we had earned. "I love you the most too, baby," I said, my voice steady, calm. Outside, the rain washed the city clean, the lights of Austin reflecting in the wet streets, the world quiet and alive. I realized then that revenge didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to be about destroying them. The best revenge was living a life they could never control, a life they could never take away, a life filled with laughter, peace, and love. Leo looked up at me, his brown eyes soft, trusting. "Mommy, we're safe now, right?" I hugged him tighter, breathing in the moment. "Yeah, baby. We're safe now." As I tucked him into bed that night, I whispered a promise to him and to myself. They would never take him from me. They would never take my life again. What would you have done if you were me? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. And I knew deep in my bones, as I turned off the light and closed his bedroom door, I would never let anyone steal my son or my life ever again.